Hare Krishna and Pranam, dear devotees. So welcome to our second session on Prabhupada Founder Acharya series by His Grace Suresvara Prabhu. So we are very fortunate that Prabhuji has agreed to do these sessions once every month. So today is our second session, and all of us, we heartily welcome Suresvara Prabhu by loudly chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. His Grace Suresvara Prabhu ki jai, Jagat Guru Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Over to you, Prabhuji.
Well, Hare Krishna Prabhus, welcome back to our Founder Acharya Essentials series. So lesson 2 is called the Founder Acharya Principle. Although the English Sanskrit compound, quote, Founder Acharya, is less than a century old, its seeds in the Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition date from the time immediately following Lord Chaitanya's departure from this world in 1534, Common Era. In this lesson, we'll look at 4 of those seeds, as well as the great Gaudiya Acharyas who sowed them. Slide. An organizational seed. Around 1545, Lord Chaitanya's chief disciples, the 6 Goswamis of Vrindavan, founded the Vishva Vaishnav Raj Sabha, which Srila Bhakti Siddhanta later identified as the gathering or congregation of devotees who worship, quote, the king of all Vaishnavas in the world, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. As the Sabha's most prolific writer and philosopher, Srila Jiva Goswami also emerged as the group's most skillful organizer. For example, he founded Vrindavan's most famous Radha Damodar temple, where he established a library of all the Goswamis' works. Sri Jiva had those works copied and then dispatched his 3 best students, Srinivas, Narottam, and Shamananda, to Bengal on the first Gaudiya Vaishnav book distribution party. The story of what happened to that party, how the books were stolen by a king's thieves, how they were recovered, and how the king and his accomplices later surrendered to Krishna, foreshadowed dramas Lord Chaitanya continues to enact through ISKCON and other Gaudiya groups today. Suffice it to say that the Goswamis Sabha, dedicated to articulating, preserving, and distributing the Lord's teachings, planted the Founder Acharya Principle's organizational seed. So that's the first seed, an organizational seed. Because if you think of that phrase, Founder Acharya, there's an organizational component, the word founder, and Acharya, there's definitely a spiritual component. So this is the first component, it's organizational. Slide. A philosophical seed. Around 1552, just a few years after the Sabha's founding, Srila Rupa Goswami finished his landmark work, Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, quote, the ocean of the pure nectar of devotional service. That's how Prabhupada translated Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. In his commentary to the Sri Chaitanya Chaitamrita Adi Lila, chapter 5, text 203, Prabhupada writes, quote, Srila Rupa Goswami is described as the Bhakti Rasacharya, or one who knows the essence of devotional service. His famous book, Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, is the science of devotional service. And by reading this book, one can understand the meaning of devotional service, unquote. So essential for devotees did Prabhupada consider Sri Rupa's masterwork that for more than 6 months in 1969, Prabhupada suspended his Bhagavatam writing to produce a summary study of Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu called The Nectar of Devotion. In his introduction, Prabhupada writes that, quote, in our mental activities, we should always try to think of Krishna and try to plan how to please him, following in the footsteps of the great Acharyas and the personal spiritual master, unquote. Later in the book, Prabhupada repeats the distinction between, quote, the great Acharyas and the personal spiritual master. By the way, he translates Sri Rupa's phrase, Sadhu Vartmanu Vartanam, which means, quote, following in the footsteps of great acharyas or teachers under the direction of the spiritual master. So in both places in Nectar Devotion, Prabhupada does make a distinction between great acharyas and one's personal spiritual master. Sometimes they're one and the same, as in Prabhupada's case, for example, but most of the time they're different. In lesson 1, we learned that initiating and instructing spiritual masters are like parents and relatives, respectively. As a child may at first see his parents and relatives as everything, then matures to see them in perspective. So a disciple may initially see his spiritual parents and relatives as everything, then matures to appreciate them in relation to, quote, the great acharyas. To help us understand this philosophical seed of the founder Acharya principle, we will now hear how the Acharya Sampradaya culture, the line of prominent Shiksha exemplars who make up our disciplic succession, inspired one famous disciple to beg his great guru to bring him closer to their foundational Acharya. Next slide. So this is called a cultural seed. Before the Gaudiya Vaishnava saint Srila Narottam Das Thakur was born, and we just did pass his Avirbhav a few days ago, Lord Chaitanya told Lokanath Goswami, quote, within a short time, a prince named Narottam will become your disciple. He will be a gifted devotee, full of love and devotion, and empowered to save the fallen conditioned souls from hellish life. His enchanting, beautiful kirtan will melt even wood or stone. So this was before Narottam appeared. Mahaprabhu told Lokanath that he's going to have a disciple. He's going to be like super disciple. And that quote was from the Narottam Vilas. But after the Lord left this world, Sri Lokanath was so distraught that he withdrew from everyone and vowed never to accept disciples. Later in Vrindavan, when Sri Jiva noticed that Narottam was drawn to the saintly Lokanath, Sri Jiva told Narottam to approach Lokanath for initiation, even though everyone knew that Lokanath had withdrawn and made this vow never to accept disciples. But Jiva, he knew this was a matter of the heart. So he said, Narottam, I want you to approach Lokanath for initiation. Even though Narottam was one of Sri Jiva's prized pupils. Narottam was a Shiksha disciple already of Jiva. But Jiva said, Narottam, you have to do this. But as ardently as Narottam approached Lokanath, just as adamantly, Lokanath refused. Resolved nonetheless, Narottam, the son of a king, vowed to become Lokanath's menial servant and took to cleansing the area where the saint performed his early morning ablutions. Because Narottam, he was very advanced and he knew, I'm from royalty. And with that kind of birth, there comes a kind of false pride. So Prabhu won't accept me, he says, as his disciple, but I'm going to do something that's going to purify me, some menial service for him. So he started cleansing the area where the saint performed his early morning ablutions. Lokanath was so absorbed in his solitary Krishna meditations that even though he noticed someone was cleansing his ablution area, he paid it little mind. But one day, after an entire year had passed, Lokanath decided to find out who was so conscientiously cleaning up after him. The next morning, he came earlier than usual and hid behind a tree. When Narottam approached, Lokanath saw who it was. Narottam, it's you. His identity exposed, Narottam fell at the saint's feet and begged to be accepted as his disciple. Lokanath refused at first, then later relented, remembering Mahaprabhu's prediction, and conquered by the pure devotion of saintly Narottam, so that he made an exception. That Narottam has conquered me by his devotion. So I'll have one disciple, I'll have an only child. Although Srila Narottam Das Thakur became the only initiated disciple of Srila Lokanath Goswami, in Song 17, verse 4 of Narottam's famous song collection, Prarthana, he longs for Lokanath to bring him to their ultimate shelter in the disciplic succession, Srila Rupa Goswami. And here's that stanza. It's verse 4 in Song 17. Prabhu Lokanatha kabe sangelanya jabe Shri Rupera Padapadni more samarpibe. When will my Lord and Master Lokanath Goswami take me with him and place me at the lotus feet of Srila Rupa Goswami? Unquote. As, quote, the chief of the six Goswamis, Srila Rupa Goswami was Narottam and Lokanath's Bhakti Rasacharya, the master most expert at relishing the moods of pure devotional service to Lord Krishna. And as Narottam's Diksha Guru, Sri Lokanath had the pleasure and the privilege of bringing his disciple closer to the foundational leader of the six Goswamis, Sabha. Now, Rasacharya may sound close to founder Acharya, but by Lord Chaitanya's inscrutable will, the organizational, philosophical, and cultural seeds sown early for, quote, founder Acharya would have to wait another 3 centuries within a crucible of disgrace before finishing seeds arrived to conclusively establish the founder Acharya principle. So between 1545 and then 1552 and then 1560, those first 3 seeds, the organizational seed and the philosophical seed and the cultural seed, they were planted rather in rapid succession. But Mahaprabhu had a plan. Not to reveal through another great devotee the crowning seeds, the final seeds of founder Acharya until 1900. Here we go. So slide, literary seeds. In the late 19th century, the great Gaudiya Vaishnava Acharya, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, identified and exposed more than a dozen counterfeit Gaudiya Vaishnava groups who, beginning just a century after Lord Chaitanya's departure, had effectively disgraced Gaudiya Vaishnavism. Not only did Srila Bhaktivinoda restore Mahaprabhu's original teachings as well as the glories of the Gaudiya Vaishnavas, he also conceived of a mission to propagate Krishna consciousness globally, thus helping to fulfill a 16th century scriptural prophecy, quote, "In every town and village, the chanting of my name will be heard." That's from the Chaitanya Bhagavad. So when reports reached Srila Bhaktivinoda, so Bhaktivinoda, he was the first one to envision a global movement to fulfill that prophecy. So Bhaktivinoda was thinking internationally. He wasn't just thinking of India, to have a bhakti renaissance. He was thinking internationally. When reports reached Srila Bhaktivinoda of a rising Western interest in Indian culture, and Sanskrit in particular, that's mainly due to the British occupation, the Thakur sent a copy of his Sanskrit work, Sri Krishna Samhita, to the American transcendentalist Ralph Waldo Emerson. When Emerson gratefully replied by requesting books in English, Srila Bhaktivinoda penned Lord Chaitanya, his life and precepts, and sent copies to several Western intellectuals, including Emerson, and universities. But it was a Bengali work by the Thakur, published in 1900 as Harinama Chintamani, that contained the crowning literary seeds for the founder Acharya principle. So Emerson, he was thrilled to get an authentic, work from a real practitioner of the tradition. But he didn't know Sanskrit, and somehow Bhaktivinoda thought that because there was an interest in Sanskrit and in the Shastras, that somehow Emerson, being a scholar, knew Sanskrit, but Emerson didn't know. So he said, "Can you write something? Can you send me something in English?" So that inspired Bhaktivinoda to write Lord Chaitanya, his life and precepts. And of course, he wrote that and he sent it off in 1896, the year of Prabhupada's birth. So there was a little sign there. Let's see here. Now in chapter 6 of Harinama Chintamani, Srila Bhaktivinoda describes three kinds of, this is my phrase, super gurus in a disciplic tradition. So that's, my English word. So but the first is this is right from the text. Sampradayera Adi Guru, the primeval guru of the tradition. So for example, in our line, it's Lord Brahma, who's appearing, in prehistoric times, at the dawn of creation, actually, in Lord Brahma's case. Sampradayera Adi Guru, the primeval guru of the tradition, directly enlightened by the Lord himself. Following the primeval guru are this is again from the verse, Shiksha Guru Pratishtita, greatly revered preceptors who keep the tradition's teachings intact over long spans of time. But when the Thakur identified the third guru, he described him in the superlative. However, the Adyacharya, or original guru of a disciplic line, he is appropriately worshipped and respected as the Guru Shiromani, the topmost crown jewel of the spiritual masters. His perfect philosophical conclusions are to be followed by all in his succession. Any contrary instructions will not be accepted, unquote. The stage was set for the founder Acharya seeds to bear fruit. So in the Bengali, Adyacharya is Bhaktivinoda's word for founder Acharya, but it didn't manifest yet because something else had to happen. So the seeds bear fruit. Slide. In the 1880s, while envisioning a worldwide Krishna consciousness movement, Srila Bhaktivinoda revived the Vaishnav Raj Sabha and launched a Bengali spiritual journal, Sajjana Toshini, for the satisfaction of the devotees. 4 decades later, so that was the 1880s, now in the 1920s, Srila Bhaktivinoda's illustrious son, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, reimagined the Sabha as the Gaudiya Mission. That was Bhaktisiddhanta's name for his mission. As the Gaudiya Mission, and transformed his father's journal into The Harmonist, an English language periodical with Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's scholarly disciple, Professor Nishikant Sanyal, as his co-editor. Well, I say slide 5. I don't know if you got, I think, anyway. Okay, yeah, here we go. That's good. Timed to coincide with the launch of the mission's brand new Calcutta headquarters, the October 1930 Harmonist carried the first of a 3-part series by Professor Sanyal about, quote, the Gaudiya Mat. It was in this article that the, quote, founder Acharya phrase, seeded for centuries, finally fructified. So here's, for the first time, you find this English Sanskrit compound in print. It's in the October 1930 issue of the Harmonist. And here's the exact spot on the screen where we see it in print. And it's in rather complicated English, because Bhaktisiddhanta, that's very often how he preached in public, to out-intellectualize the Western intellectuals. And also some of his scholarly disciples, they followed in his footsteps. So it's a little hard to follow, but we'll unpack it. Quote, the Gaudiya Mat is also identical with its founder Acharya. That's how it first appeared, with no hyphen and 2 Y's. The associates, followers, and abode of his divine grace, referring to Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, are limbs of himself. None of them claim to be anything but a fully subordinate limb of this single individual. This unconditional, causeless, spontaneous submission to the head is found to be not only compatible with, but absolutely necessary for the fullest freedom of initiative of the subordinate limbs, unquote. So sometimes Prabhupada would also refer, of course, later to ISKCON as his body, and he said, you are all the limbs of my body, and like that. And he said the BBT was his heart. And we find our complete, we fulfill our potential as Prabhupada's followers when we cooperate and work together and not do things whimsically or independently. So that's why Sanyal said, this unconditional, spontaneous submission to the head is found to be not only compatible with, but absolutely necessary for the fullest freedom of initiative of the subordinate limbs. It's a paradox that we find our freedom by fulfilling our role as part and not pretend to be the whole. Yeah, that's the same with all Jiva souls. When we act whimsically and we try to be independent of Krishna, then we actually become more less free. We become less free because we come under the Krishna's material nature laws. But we find our full freedom when we cooperate and lovingly and willingly serve Krishna with love as his part and parcel, not to try to imitate Krishna as being the whole. So during the Gaudiya mission's finest hour, which was the first Vaishnav preaching expedition to Europe in the 1930s, the book Srila Bhaktisiddhanta's leading preachers took with them was Sri Krishna Chaitanya, written by Professor Sanyal and edited by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta. The work was written with sufficient breadth, depth, and excellence to impress the intelligentsia of the West. In its front matter, the elaborate table of contents highlighted the intimate connection between the Adi Gurus, remember the original gurus of the 4 lines, like Brahma and Rudra and Lakshmi and Kumaras. So in the elaborate, so Sanyal made that explicit, that connection between the Adi Gurus, or the primeval preceptors of the 4 Vaishnava Sampradayas, and the Sampradayas' 4 founder Acharyas, the Adi Gurus' extraordinarily empowered representatives, who revitalized those disciplic successions within recorded history. All right, slide, get a visual of this. Okay, yeah, I think it's, okay, that's all right. Quote, the systems of Sri Vishnu Swami, Sri Nimbarka, Sri Ramanuja, and Sri Madhva are connected with the ancient times by their recognition of the remote authority of the eternal ancient teachers, namely Lakshmi, Brahma, Rudra, and the 4 Kumaras, respectively. The 4 founder acharyas of the Iron Age profess to preach the views of those original teachers of the religion. And there you see the visual of it, because some of us, we learn better when we see it, right? Visual learners. So Sri Krishna Chaitanya, that book that Sanyal wrote and Bhaktisiddhanta edited, strictly applied, quote, founder Acharya to the 4 Sampradayas revitalizers. You know, those 4, Madhva, Ramanuja, Vishnu Swami, Nimbarka. And therefore, they're sometimes called Sampradaya Acharyas. Since Srila Bhaktisiddhanta had founded but a branch of the Gaudiya Sampradaya, itself but an extension of the Brahma Madhva Sampradaya, he knew many would consider him presumptuous if he applied the Sampradaya title to himself. For the written, so he didn't call himself a Sampradaya Acharya. And sometimes you hear devotees do that in ISKCON for Prabhupada, but that's not accurate. Prabhupada did not found a new Sampradaya. He was obliged, as we'll see later in the series, to found a new branch of the Sampradaya, but he didn't found a new Sampradaya. So it's not really glorifying Prabhupada to say that. So Bhaktisiddhanta did the same thing. He knew many would consider him presumptuous if he applied the Sampradaya title to himself. For the written record, however, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta did allow Professor Sanyal to confidently refer to him as the Gaudiya Mission's founder Acharya within the pages of the Harmonist. So founder Acharya he is of that branch. Okay, slide. In lesson 4 of this series, we'll see why Srila Bhaktisiddhanta could, with equal confidence later, leave this world and his founder Acharya title behind. He could foresee what would soon befall his own institution, as well as the one disciple who would be ready, willing, and able to revive it as the founder Acharya of a fresh branch of Lord Chaitanya's mission, far, far away from Mother India. Hare Krishna. Okay, Prabhus, I'll be happy to hear your questions and comments now. I think we had a little challenge there coordinating the slides we were speaking, but I think everybody got the idea. And now, all right, I'm seeing everybody and
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
So Hare Krishna devotees. So if anybody has question, they can unmute or raise the hand. Prabhu, one question it came to my mind is that the unique relationship, between Narottam Das Thakur and Srila Jiva Goswami, that how he was, one of his 3 jeweled, disciples, and how Narottam Das Thakur, he had a dream the Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, take Diksha from Loknath.
Lokanath.
Yes.
Well, Lokanath had the.
Yes. And
Okay.
so in our thing, in our ISKCON, sometimes I think that we have so much emphasis on the Diksha part, right? Whereas we see in Narottam Das Thakur's life, how important role both the Shiksha Guru and the Diksha Guru played. And so how to see it, Prabhuji, in a manner that we see our Shiksha Guru and Diksha Guru in the same level. Of course, we don't chant our Shiksha Guru's Pranam mantra. Sometimes they may not have it, but how to have that respect, and also how to understand what actually means by a Shiksha Guru. Because sometimes we think our counsel is a Shiksha Guru. Of course, we should think everybody is a Shiksha Guru, but Shiksha Guru is not a counselor. It is a different. So can you please explain that little bit to us, Prabhuji?
Oh, yeah. Well, Shiksha Guru, if you've ever heard Banu Maharaj speak, it's a rather broad term. And the way we use it in ISKCON, it's not quite ripe yet. It's not quite mature because, as we know from the first chapter of CC, I think we brought it up last time in the last lesson, that they're equal and identical manifestations of the Lord. They're not different. But because of ISKCON's history, we tend to spotlight the Diksha Guru more. And we're still kind of recovering from that. And tomorrow, as a matter of fact, we're going to have our second annual virtual Guru Conference, which I'll be attending. And but that's only, of course, it's only Diksha Gurus. There aren't many of us at ISKCON. And if we're serious about expanding the number of gurus in ISKCON, we're going to have to include many Shiksha Gurus, and we're going to have to start following what Prabhupada says in the first chapter of CC, where it says generally the one who gives the most Shiksha becomes the Diksha Guru, but we don't do that enough. So it's not surprising that it's puzzling, because we haven't actually matured our guru disciple culture in ISKCON yet. At the same time, it's a fact from Shastra that and sometimes the Shiksha Guru becomes more prominent. I think maybe we discussed last time how, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, his Diksha Guru was Pin Bihari Goswami, but over time, he became closer to his Shiksha Guru, who was the Vaishnava Sarvabhauma of the time, Jagannath Das Babaji. They became closer. Not that Bhaktivinoda was disrespecting his Diksha Guru, but he had differences with him. And over time, he became more inspired by Jagannath Das Babaji, which is why in ISKCON we have Jagannath Das Babaji on the altar. Bhaktivinoda Shiksha Guru, next to him. So I think it's the summary answer is Shiksha Diksha. It's a work in progress in ISKCON. But we should be, really making better use of Shiksha Gurus in ISKCON. And there's even evidence in Prabhupada's Vani, as Bhanu Swami points out in his seminar about this, Shiksha Diksha, which I last saw in person in Mayapur in 2020, just as the pandemic was coming on, and we were still flying and all this, but it quickly came on after the festival. But I took his seminar, Shiksha Diksha, and it really opened a lot of minds. It opened my mind to how you can make a case from Prabhupada's own words, how Shiksha can be the main deliverer, how Diksha can be the main deliverer. It just depends on the relationship that manifests by Krishna's arrangement, because the real deliverer is Krishna. Ahang tvang sarva papebhyo moksha yashyami. I will deliver you from all sinful reactions. But how? But through many, many people. So it's not a black and white, hard and fast thing. It's all based on relationships, which the Lord reveals over time. I think that's the best I can do right now, given where we are in ISKCON at this time.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna. Does anybody has any other question to ask Prabhuji?
And preferably on the points in the what you heard.
Yes, from what we heard today.
Yeah. Founder Acharya principle.
Also, Prabhuji, then Ronnie Prabhu, you have a question you want to ask?
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Yes, I was just trying to collect my thoughts on asking the question. Prabhu, in the last you mentioned about Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Maharaj about not carrying on that founder Acharya thing with himself and for Prabhupada. I did not get that point. Exactly was it?
Okay. Yeah, it's a little. When I reread the script, I see how it's easy to get confused. When I do the whole seminar in person, I really spell it out. But in the essential script, it's a little quick. So what I was trying to say in that brief talk was that if he didn't in public, he just introduced, as Prabhupada would, he would introduce himself as the founder Acharya of ISKCON. And so he also was he was the founder Acharya of the Gaudiya Math. He allowed himself to be called that in print. But because he thought there would be a perception, Bhaktisiddhanta did, that if he introduced himself like that people would equate that with Sampradaya Acharya, because they knew the heads of the different Sampradayas, not the Adi Gurus, like Lakshmi and Rama, etc., but Vishnu Swami, Nimbarka, Kumaras, Ramanuja. He thought that they would equate that with the actual Sampradaya Acharyas of those lines. But he himself knew that as the founder of the Gaudiya Math, he wasn't establishing a new line, because what are we in? We're in the Brahma, Madhva, Gaudiya Sampradaya. He was reviving the Gaudiya Sampradaya, which had been obscured for hundreds of years by all these Upasampradayas that Bhaktivinoda identified 13 of them later, and dismissed them. He exposed them as being bogus, as counterfeit, imposters. So he allowed himself to be referred to that in the journal as the founder Acharya of the Gaudiya mission. But he didn't advertise himself like that in public. And here's another reason. And I sort of hinted at it at the end. He could foresee being Trikalagya, being a Shaktivesh avatar, being a ray of Vishnu, being that caliber of guru. He could foresee what was going to become of his own mission, that it was going to fragment. And then, so at the same time, there's a lot of evidence, as we'll see in lesson 4, as I mentioned at the end of the talk. He could not only foresee the fragmentation of his own mission after he would leave the world, but he could foresee the one disciple who would be capable of reviving the mission and actually wearing the founder Acharya, wearing that title fully, and take it all over the world. He could foresee who would do that. And that was, of course, they became our Prabhupada, his disciple, Bhaichara Aravinda. So it's a real fascinating thing, how he handled, because in that, how Bhaktisiddhanta handled the launch, the public, because he launched his mission the factual start of Bhaktisiddhanta's mission was in 1918, when he gave himself sannyas by looking at a picture of his Guru Maharaj, Gaur Das Babaji. He gave himself, now that's the caliber, he could accept sannyas through a picture of his Guru Maharaj. Now that's, of course, not to be imitated. That was the factual start of the mission. And then by the time, that was in 1918. And then by the time Abhaycharan Day, the person who would become our Prabhupada, met Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, it was 1922. And they actually had, there was a building, number 1 Alta Duncan Junction, which we hear, online, where there's going to be a big launch of that. ISKCON has now renovated the building. It's going to be a big new ISKCON Tirtha. But it was small then. And it wasn't until 1930 when this benefactor of the Gaudiya Mutt built them a great grand new palace that Bhaktisiddhanta let Professor Sanyal, whom he initiated also as Bhakti Sudhakar Narayan Das, he let him write many articles about. It was like the coming of it was the Gaudiya Mutt going, really coming out, because they had been really successful in the 1920s in their preaching. And now they had a grand new headquarters in Bagh Bazaar, Marble Palace. And so Bhaktisiddhanta let that issue of the heart, several issues actually, tell the public who they were. They're reviving Mahaprabhu's Gaudiya Sampradaya, and they're the legitimate heirs, the descendants of Mahaprabhu and the 6 Goswamis, with Bhaktisiddhanta being the founder Acharya of the Mutt, of the Gaudiya Mutt, the mission. But yeah, that marble palace, he confided to Prabhupada, you'll see later in lesson 4, I wish I could sell the marble off the walls and print books, because my leading preachers are becoming attached to opulence now. They're losing the preaching spirit. If you ever get money, print books. That was the beginning of, the book distribution mission in ISKCON. It went deep into Prabhupada's heart. If you ever get money, print books. So, yeah. Okay, does that sort of clear it up?
Yes, Prabhuji. Yes, Prabhuji.
All right. Yay. It's a lot better in person. I hope to visit y'all someday in person if we ever fly around safely again.
Yes, definitely.
Yes, definitely. Hare Krishna. Okay, we still have time. Any more questions?
Hare Krishna.
Jai.
So do we have any more questions from Prabhuji on what we heard today?
The 4 seeds, they were organizational, philosophical, literary, cultural, and literary.
And this, Prabhuji, this founder Acharya term is very unique, that how it is used in Harmonist and how Bhaktivinoda Thakur also, because usually we see it in isolation. We don't see that it is coming through our parampara only. It is very surprising to know this, that the exact term was used before.
Yes, and it was used, in other words, in the cultural seed, when we talked about Lokanath and Narottam, and how they were followers of Rupa Goswami. Because when Rupa Goswami wrote Bhakti-rasamrita Sindhu, even though he wasn't the eldest or the most renounced or prolific writer, famous, everybody completely recognized him as the chief, because Bhakti-rasamrita Sindhu was, Sri Rupa, he's the most expert in relishing the mellows of devotional service. So he's the chief. So he was known as what did Prabhupada say? The Bhakti Rasacharya. So that's Sanskrit. That's all Sanskrit. British were not in India yet. It wasn't until the 1700s. So, yeah, because the founder Acharya is a hybrid, English and Sanskrit. And when the British were there for most of those years, bhakti was disgraced, by those Upasampradayas. So yeah, it is unique. English, Sanskrit, hybrid, organizational, spiritual compound. Yeah. So Prabhupada, and as let's see, in lesson 4 also, or maybe next lesson, yeah. We'll see how when Prabhupada came to the West, his intention wasn't to be the founder Acharya of anything. He just wanted to revive his spiritual master's mission. But they didn't help him. He was trying to get the God brothers to cooperate with him, and let's do it. It's better late than never. It's been 30 years, since Guru Maharaj passed away, but they couldn't do it. So Mahaprabhu and his Guru Maharaj revealed to Prabhupada that he was going to have to go it alone with them, with their help, and found a brand new branch. He had to make a clean break from that tragedy of the breakup of the Gaudiya Mutt. He had to found a new organization, ISKCON. So it was only when Mahaprabhu made that clear to Prabhupada that he did it. Otherwise, he wasn't about that. He wasn't about starting anything new. But he needed to, he was empowered. He was uniquely empowered to do what he did, to know how to turn Mlechas and Yavanas, people outside Mother India, into Vaishnavas in a very, very carefully, very gradually. Yeah. So, Jai, well, that's more and more manifest gloriously in the coming lessons.
And also, Prabhuji, that sometimes we hear, like you said, devotees say that ISKCON is also a new sampradaya in that manner. But we see Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he steadfastly said, Brahma Madhav Gaudiya Sampradaya. And Prabhupada also, from the day 1 to the day last, he carried it as a chip on his shoulder, it is Gaudiya Madhav, Vaishnav Sampradaya. It's not a new Sampradaya, that it is the same continuity, because that continuity is important for us to be bona fide also, isn't it?
Yes. Oh, yeah. But you use that phrase in English when we say chip on shoulder means a grudge. What did you mean to say?
No, I didn't mean in that manner. I meant he showed it, he proudly showed it, that we are from Brahma Madhav Gaudiya Sampradaya,
yes,
like that.
Okay, right. Yes. Yeah, this is ancient. This is timeless. This is not something new. This is not, I didn't make it up, or it's not a cult, or it's a timeless treasure, which now the whole world needs to know. The whole world needs this. The whole world is going mad with its secularism and technology and thinking it doesn't need God anymore. God is dead. Yeah, this is it. Yeah. Yeah, if I have any credit, Prabhupada said, it's that I didn't change it. You're getting the exact same message of Lord Krishna and Lord Chaitanya and my Guru Maharaj. But of course, he creatively packaged it differently. Old wine in new bottles. Prabhupada would like to say, this is old wine in new bottles. Jai. And we have to keep repackaging it. That's our tradition. You have to keep not changing the message, but creatively reaching people in novel ways, as Prabhupada said in one purport, 1.5.16 purport, Bhagavatam. Okay, Prabhus, are you going to let your leader show you up here and ask all the questions? Come on, we know you got tons of questions.
Prabhuji, I also want to request that please explain those 5 terms you spoke that Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he's gave those terms, the different acharyas, Prabhuji.
The terms. Let's see. I'm not sure.
I will show Prabhuji. These ones, Prabhuji, these ones. The Sampradaya Adi Guru, Shiksha.
Oh yeah. Those are just key words from the verse.
Yes.
From the verse in chapter 6 of Harinama Chintamani. I didn't put the whole verse up because it wasn't really necessary. It was just key words from the verse. So that's the Bengali is given, and then there's the English. The original guru of the Sampradaya. So that's, in our case, it's Lord Brahma. Shiksha Guru Pratishtita, the Sampradaya is instructing guru. So previous acharyas in the Sampradaya, like, let's see, what's an example? Vishwanath, Baladev. Before Prabhupada would write his purports, he would consult previous acharyas from our Sampradaya. And also he would consult from other Sampradayas if it was relevant, like Ramanuja, Viraraghava Acharya, Sridhar Swami. Okay, so that's Shiksha Guru Pratishtita. And Adyacharya Yini. So when Bhaktivinoda mentions that, then he says that Acharya, the Adi Acharya, Adyacharya, one who's the original Acharya of a disciplic line, he's the Guru Shiromani. He's the crest jewel of all the gurus, and his conclusions are the last word. And if anybody says anything that contradicts those conclusions, then they're not to be accepted. Even if, even because as Prabhupada, sometimes when we read Prabhupada's purports, he talks about, so Jiva Goswami says this, and Vishwanath says this, and maybe they have different opinions. But to be, Prabhupada Anugas, to be Prabhupada followers, we accept what Prabhupada. Sometimes Prabhupada just does that. He just puts out different perspectives from different acharyas out there to show that the absolute truth is many faceted, and you can see it from many different angles, and depending perhaps on the rasa even of the acharya. Like Bhishmadev, he's a Mahajan. So he's relishing on his bed of arrows deathbed, how Krishna's coming after him, to shoot him with arrows. But he's feeling those arrows. He's in that skirmish. He is like love bites, the bites of a lover. And when you hear Prabhupada talk about it, it's so innocent the way Prabhupada says it. Is it not so? Is it not so that when you love your lover, sometimes the lover bites? He's so innocent the way he says it. So Bhishmadev, he's in Viraras, he's in chivalry rasa. He likes to see Krishna on the battlefield. But then there's a tinge of conjugal in there. The arrows from the lover, Krishna, Krishna's his beloved. He wants to feel that. So as soon as Krishna got off that chariot and was prepared to kill Bhishma to protect Arjuna and break his own promise that he would stay neutral, Bhishma's like, all right, bring it on. I'm ready. But it wasn't Krishna's plan. He wanted to glorify Bhishma later by having him speak Bhishma Shiksha, as recorded in the 9th chapter of the 1st canto. Yeah. How did I get there? What were we talking about? I forgot to.
We were talking, Prabhuji, the Sampradaya Adi Guru, he says Lord Brahma. Yes. Then Shiksha Guru, Pratishtita, you said they are the previous acharyas like Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, right. Baldev Vidyabhushan. Right. Then this Adi Acharya Yini and Guru Shrimani, they are same?
Yeah. Well, Guru Shrimani is just a description of the Adi Acharya.
Oh,
if you actually see the verse in translation, he's not another guru. It's that Adi Acharya. He's the Guru Shiromani. He's the topmost, Shiromani. He's the topmost crown jewel of the spiritual masters. And his conclusions are to be accepted as supreme, and nothing else that contradicts that is to be accepted. So for us, it's Prabhupada. He has the last word. And we can respect other perspectives as long as they're within the the Vaishnava tradition. We don't accept Mayavad, obviously. But yeah, we just relish and appreciate Prabhupada, who was uniquely empowered to do what no one else ever did. Take Krishna consciousness all over the world. That's, whew, yeah. Our founder Acharya is an intimate friend of Krishna's. I was just, we were just blessed by GBC Vaishnavi Mother Malati, who just came to Tucson here in Southwest US for a few days. And I was lucky enough to speak with her. I had an hour meeting with her, and I was asking her how we can make our guru-disciple culture more founder Acharya centered. And so the first thing she said was, well, the first thing, Prabhuji, is we have to understand who Prabhupada is. And I said, yeah, that's part of my seminars too, but what do you mean when you say that, Malati, Prabhu? I mean that he's an intimate friend of Krishna's. We have many Guru Maharajas, we have many Guru Devs in ISKCON, but look at our founder Acharya. He's not just a previous Acharya, he's an intimate friend of Krishna, and he was uniquely empowered by Krishna to come and do what he did. People have to be educated, have to know that. So that's kind of her passion. She likes to remind her GBC colleagues, because she said, yeah, we're just having our meetings now. And the first meeting the first topic on this year's virtual meetings on Zoom. They're having them now. They're going on. Is how to do this. Is how to make our guru culture more founder Acharya centered. I think there was something on Dandavats about this. I think that was a resolution. But how do you practically do that? Well, it comes from everybody in ISKCON recognizing Prabhupada's his stature as being an intimate friend of Lord Krishna. What is it? Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pacharvi Nirvishesha Shunyavadi. Oh no, Krishna Prastaya. Yeah, Krishna Prastaya Bhutale. He's Krishna Prastaya. He's very, very dear to Lord Krishna. So that's her passion. That's her contribution to the topic. And then I'm going to share this with you. And then she shared with me, she said, because what we got from Malati, because think about it, Mataji, she joined in 1967 in January. She was on the ground floor of the launch of the San Francisco temple, the second temple in ISKCON. First was New York. And they were just so enthralled with Swamiji, as they called him in those days, that they were, at the same time, they didn't know anything. They were spiritual infants. So she said, and Swamiji knew this. So we would ask him anything under the sun. And it was kind of like a father, or you could say even a grandfather, in Prabhupada's case, it could have been their grandfather. He knew that they were just like babies, like infants. And that whatever they asked, they were asking out of this kind of childlike wonder. Because they just accepted. Because his Prabhupada's stature was so, he was so grand, and he was so loving, and he was so learned, and he was so compassionate. It was everything. They just wanted to be like him. So she said, so one day, one of us said, oh yeah, it was one of the devotees, just in her wonder of Swamiji, she wrote a poem. And the poem was describing Swamiji as, they didn't know the term cowherd boy, but they knew from the American West, cowboy. And so they'd heard about that, Krishna, he herded the cows and he had boys and boyfriends and girlfriends. So the young, the infant devotee wrote a poem describing Swamiji as a cowboy. And Prabhupada, he just heard it like a grandfather or a father would just hear, the poem as a little child. And then afterwards they said, Swamiji, are you a cowboy? And don't think, cowboys and Indians like in America, but think cowherd boy, like Prabhupada describes Krishna and the cowherd boys. So Prabhupada saw that they didn't have any agenda. They weren't trying to, jump to some level that they weren't on, that they claiming some adhikar, to know Prabhupada's rasa with Krishna. Because later on, Prabhupada would dismiss questions like that. But he just saw very sweet, innocent devotees asking an innocent question. Swami, are you a cowboy? And Prabhupada just, with a twinkle in his eye, just said, yes. And that completely resonated later on when they heard about Prabhupada's poem, not Markini Bhagavad Dharma that he wrote on the ship in Boston Harbor, but a few days earlier, he had written Prayer to the Lotus Feet of Lord Krishna, expressing his longing for Krishna and how he longed to run and play in the fields with you, my friend, and it was in the mood of a cowherd boy. So anyway, so that's kind of that's Prabhupada's stature was what Malati was saying. If we want to educate people, we have to know that he's not just a previous spiritual master, that he's an intimate friend of Lord Krishna, and automatically we'll all have the same identity as followers of that great soul. And we'll love our Siksha and Diksha gurus because they do bring us closer to Prabhupada. So on that note, I see it's past the hour, and unless there's any other burning questions. Now, Prabhu's, next time I'm going to send the script ahead, and Prabhu's going to share it with you all. He won't share the slides. We'll keep those a surprise, but we're going to send the script ahead. Prabhu can share it, and you can study it. And you're going to hear me basically read the script. Sometimes I stray off script to try to embellish it a little, but please think of questions which will bring you closer to Prabhupada and your service to him. Okay.
Thank you, Prabhuji.
Thank you very much.
You
And the
so
next
very
time
much.
I think it's called Our Srila Prabhupada. I think that's the name of the lesson. Yeah, and it's all about Prabhupada, it being revealed to Prabhupada, what Lord Chaitanya wanted him to do, and how Prabhupada revealed that to us. Yeah. So.
Wow. Yes. So we look forward to it, Prabhuji. And we heartily thank you for giving us your association.
We'll have to identify the exact date later, I guess. We're not sure which Friday, the date will be, but we'll nail that down somewhere in the middle of March. Let's see, Gaur Purnima is actually on a Thursday here in this part of the world. I don't know how it falls in India, maybe Friday. But even if it is Friday, maybe we could do it on Gaur Purnima. That might be a nice time to do it, because it'll be later on, won't it? Your time.
Yes.
Anyway, we'll talk about it.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So, thank you so very much, Prabhu.
Hey,
so we heartily
thank you
for giving us your association. And we loudly chant Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna,
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare,
Hare Rama,
Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Hare Bol.
Ki jai. Hare Krishna.
Gaur Premanandi.
Hare Hare Bol, Prabhuji.
Hare Bol.
Hare Bol, Prabhuji.